Good evening. My name is Dr. Hank Stopinski. I'm the Superintendent of Schools for the Royalton Heartland Central School District. I'd like to thank all of you for joining me this evening. This is the second of 3 parent meetings. Over 200 questions were shared prior to the meeting. I will not have the answers to all of the questions tonight, but will share the most current information and use the unanswered questions as part of our next phase in preparing to reopen our schools. Please know that the situation is very, very fluid. Safety of our students and staff are our primary concern. Each model and solution has its positives and negatives, and our decision moving forward will need to take into consideration the needs of our students, staff, families, and more. This evening I'm going to have 3 sections to the questions that I'm responding to. The first one will be around safety. The second component will be around student services. The third, teaching and learning. If you have not done so already, please feel free to click on the link at the top of this video for submitting questions. In the event that I am unable to respond to your questions during this session, I will attempt to respond Tuesday morning at 8:30 for the third and final session for the community. Following today's presentation, a link with the recording will be posted on the district website for others to see. So let's get started. We'll talk a little bit about safety and sanitation. One of the frequent questions that we received over the course of the last couple of days was, what threshold number of COVID cases or exposures will trigger transition to all remote lessons? There is no hard and fast number about the COVID cases and exposures. The governor has used a number of 9% transmission rate as something that he would do a statewide or a regional closure. But the Department of Health here in Niagara County and the school district has not determined a hard number. It would be a case-by-case kind of decision, and we'll take a look at a lot of factors before we make that decision. But again, thinking of the safety of our students and staff. Will COVID testing be required before school begins, as colleges are doing? We encourage folks to get COVID testing in one of the 8 sites that are found in Niagara County, but it will not be required for students or staff to return back to school. What is the plan for testing teachers and staff? As I mentioned, it's an option for folks to do, but there is no district plan to require our teachers and staff to be tested for the COVID virus. In the event a classmate or teacher is positive, will the whole class need to be quarantined? One of the areas that we've been working very closely with the Department of Health and our other school districts is, what are the roles and responsibilities of testing and contact tracing? This is clearly the responsibility of the Niagara County Department of Health. With that said, the school district will be working very closely with them to assist them in their contact tracing. Because of HIPAA regulations, as well as other rules that govern the Department of Health, we will not be able to disclose which staff members have come down with any positive COVID test. But we will work with the Department of Health to provide them the information that will allow them to contact trace. It's important to know that when contact tracing takes place, it's typically those individuals that have spent 10 to 15 minutes sustained with someone that is COVID positive in close proximity. The precautions that we're taking with 6-foot spacing and masks will keep that spacing beyond what is normally considered. Any student passing in the hallways or on the athletic fields or on the playground is likely not to be contacted for tracing. Will a note be required by a doctor if a child is out sick for any reason or shows symptoms that may or may not be COVID related? If a child tests more than 100 degrees or is exposed to individuals that have tested positive, or has been in contact with someone that has been part of the state quarantine situation, that individual will be required to visit a physician and have a COVID test, which will come back negative to return back to school, or will be required to do remote learning for a 14-day period of time. There's a question here. There is a rumor going around Facebook as to if a teacher has a concern about a student having the virus, they are going to keep our kids away from us, and we will not be able to pick them up at school. That's not a true statement. Any child that is showing symptomatic for COVID or the flu or any other symptoms that we would normally call our parents, they'll be sent to either the nurse's office if they have an upset stomach, but if they're showing COVID-specific symptoms, then they'll be going to what's referred to as an isolation room, which have been established in each of our 3 buildings. They'll then wait there and then be picked up by their parents as soon as practicable. Once the student has left, we will completely sanitize the isolation rooms prior to any other student or staff member using that space. Okay, what's the process for notifying parents of confirmed COVID exposure? This again will be led by our Department of Health. We'll likely be following very similar procedures that we would if a child had pink eye in our building or if there was a head lice examples. We're going to do our best that we possibly can to replicate the current systems that are in place for notification. How will communication take place if my child is exposed to COVID? As I've mentioned, this will be a Department of Health. They'll take the lead role, and then we will work with them to communicate with those folks that need to be contacted. If my child is too sick for school, do they need a test before returning? Mandatory quarantine. What should we do because my son gets sick at least 3 times a year? Again, we'll be monitoring those symptoms, and unfortunately, in the current day and age, if they're running a fever, then they'll need to be seeing their physician and be getting that COVID test as we suggested. The Department of Health is currently looking at this regulation and determining whether or not the pediatricians will be able to have the ability to identify or test a child for something other than COVID that would be symptomatic of what the COVID features are. I learned this morning that there are some quick tests right now that they'll be utilizing in the hospitals very shortly that can actually test and distinguish between the common cold, flu, and COVID-like symptoms. So let's be optimistic that that will come and be available to us sooner than later so that we can keep our children into the school. Will random testing be conducted? Who does it? There will be no random testing within the school district. The testing, again, through the Department of Health. Okay. Question about, with the new non-invasive saliva, the spit test becoming available, will we use it in our district for random testing of all grade students? We will not be utilizing that for any random testing right now, but we do encourage those types of tests to be used by the pediatricians in our Department of Health and to inform us of any potential challenges we'll be faced with the COVID. Okay. What are the total number of positive cases reported in school before you close school or go fully virtual? Again, that'll be determined by the Department of Health and the guidance documents that we have right now. There is not a hard number that I can share with you at this time. Okay, a lot of questions. If someone tests positive or someone in the family gets testing positive, I think I've answered that question pretty well. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, which would be our facilities. There's several questions about the facilities. The first one is regarding our heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems. Will all school buildings have the MERV 13 ventilation systems just as malls and gyms are required to have? We will not have all of our spaces with the MERV 13. We do exceed the recommendations from the Department of Health and Department of Education for schools. We are going to increase the filtration systems to recycle the air more often than we have in the past, and as much as our system can handle. The good news is we have new systems that are going in right now at the elementary school and also at the middle school in next summer's capital project that will help us to improve the systems. There are questions, water fountains and sinks. We will and have actually installed bottle fillers at each of our buildings so that students can use water bottles and refill them. The former policies at the middle school were to have a special permission to utilize the water fountains. That is not the case for this coming school year. We do encourage all students to bring a water bottle, take it with them to school, and bring that home and make sure they maintain a sanitary situation with it. Several questions about classrooms. Will Wednesday in between groups be used for disinfecting? We will be disinfecting our buildings every single day, multiple times during the day for high-touch surfaces such as door handles, water fountains, bathrooms. We will be in the classrooms multiple times a day, and also doing a deep sanitizing every single day after school. When our students leave the building at the end of the day, the maintenance staff and the custodians will be in the buildings doing that. We have increased the number of custodians and cleaners during the day to make certain that we have constant coverage throughout the building. In high school, how are the desks being cleaned after each class? That'll be a combination and effort by our cleaners and the sanitize the space. And in the case that teachers and students wish to do so, they'll be able to do some touch-ups. We'll be providing the cleaning supplies that are necessary and approved by the state of New York. If Wednesday is going to be a school cleaning day, does that mean there will be a lighter cleaning done on Monday and Thursday? No, that's not true. We'll be doing the very, very detailed sanitation each and every day at our school. Okay, next topic around temperature checks. So the protocol that we've established that we'll be implementing is as follows. We're going to be asking every family member to take the responsibility of doing a temperature check and a COVID check of their children each and every day. We're in the final stages of getting an approved tool, which would be like an app that'll be found on the website that a family member could go log in on their phone or their computer. They'll click on the app, they'll type in their child's name, they'll enter in and check off a series of boxes regarding symptoms and temperature, and that'll automatically be uploaded to the school, the administrator, the principal, and the school nurse. So that'll be the first line of defense. After that, as the students arrive, we'll be having, we've just ordered this week, a series of body scanners that will give us a temperature scan for up to 30 students at a time. If any of the students are running a temperature above 100 degrees, they'll be identified, and we'll follow that up with a non-contact thermometer to double check. If a child's running a temperature at that point, they'll be sent home with their families. We're also going to utilize that body scanner as students go to their lunch during the middle part of the day. We'll move that tool so that we'll have a second set of checks. Finally, as we monitor the temperature checks coming in from the families, if we see an incidental singleton kind of miss on a certain day because a parent just forgot to do that, or they didn't hit the send button or whatever it might be, we'll make certain that the nurse and the monitors that are trained to do temperature checks will do so immediately. If we start to see a pattern in which a family has not yet entered their data for multiple days, then we'll be reaching out to those individuals with the school principal to check to see if there's any problems and try to resolve those as soon as possible. So other things about temperature checks. The family has multiple children attending school, one child is sent home, do all the children have to remain home? Only if they're showing symptoms of 100-degree temperature or more, or other COVID-related symptoms. It won't be required if one of a child has that. For all we know, that child could have a cold or a flu. We talked about how we'll ensure that families are taking temperatures. The question is, why can't there be an employee on the bus taking kids' temperatures before they get on the bus? Unfortunately, the transportation rules will not allow for any bus driver or bus monitor to be taking temperatures of children as they get on the bus. We have approximately 18 runs in the morning, and that would be quite a feat for us to be able to put people with the sole responsibility of doing that. And we're not certain that that's a wise use of resources at this time. Okay. There was a question, if we take temperatures on school days, will there be a hard time calling in the information to the school? We're hoping to avoid that through this app that I was talking to you about with our COVID assessment. And then questions about masks. Masks will be worn on the school buses. When the student arrives at school and they transition from the school bus to their classrooms. Right now it's required that students wear masks with a 6-foot spacing. We will have situations where there'll be barriers for our speech classes and other very specific purposes. And we're waiting for ruling from the Department of Health whether or not we can utilize portable barriers where students can actually set those up on their desk and be able to have their mask breaks at their desks. Right now we're not certain we're going to be able to do that. Right now the standard and the recommendations that have come from the Department of Health is 6-foot spacing with masks on during the course of the day. We understand that's going to be a real struggle for many of our students. I do observe lots of young people at the supermarkets, on their walks and so forth, and they're very good about wearing the masks. We're hoping that they'll be able to do that in schools with intermittent breaks for them to be able to get outside and not have those masks on to get some fresh air and to get a break from that. We're working through those protocols at this time. Okay. All right. The question is, how are children going to take breaks without masks safely? We're going to work on getting them excessive distancing in the outdoors to be able to get the fresh air and to be able to get those mask breaks. We're working out those systems right now. Is there criterion for masks? Can children wear homemade masks to school? If you take a look at the CDC guidelines, there's a whole bunch of things on masks. One of the things that we've learned is those single-ply cotton masks are not very effective. So those windsocks that you pull up over your mouth, or perhaps a bandana that's a single layer of cotton, are not very effective at maintaining all those droplets. Typically, a very effective mask, a homemade mask with 2-ply, which means 2 layers of cotton, is appropriate. And all the way up to the I-95s, which surgical nurses and physicians are utilizing. Surgical masks are another option. We will be providing masks for those families that need them. If families do provide the masks, which we encourage, we do ask that you have multiple masks so that you can keep them appropriately laundered for the students. How will kids in the hallways stay far apart? Students will be encouraged to socially distance in their transitions. And as I mentioned earlier here, the contact tracing is dependent upon students being in close proximity for an extended period of time. There's limited transmission that's been documented for students that are simply passing in the hallways, very much like when you're on a walk in a park or a trail somewhere and you pass someone. That is similar to what we're expecting here at the school. What will you do for children who speak quietly and are shy because it's hard to hear behind the mask? With our smaller class sizes that we're anticipating through the blended model to start, relationships will be built very quickly, and the expectation is that our staff are going to be working very closely and knowing exactly what the needs of the students, to engage them through the relationships that they're going to build and make sure that all students' needs are going to be met. Can the kids or staff wear face shields instead of a mask? Kids need to see facial expressions. Unfortunately, we cannot allow masks that are not sealed to the neck. There's very specific outlines for masks. Right now, a teacher can wear a mask, but they must have a fabric mask underneath the shield, the plastic shield that I'm describing. There will be some exceptions. We're looking right now at purchasing masks for our speech individuals in some of the lower levels that have a clear front that the students will be able to see their teacher's lips move as they're speaking and working on the basic letter and vowel and sound development. I encourage parents and family members, if they think that's important, to also seek about purchasing their own individual mask for their children that might have those advanced features. Okay, that's on the questions we had on students and masks. And there were some questions about PPE and distancing, and there's some observations that were shared in one of the questions that during the shutdown, when materials were picked up and handed, that some teachers were observed as not wearing their masks with fidelity, that there was some contact and the social distancing weren't being adhered to. I regret that that may very well have happened. We've worked very closely with our staff. We're going to continue to train them. And I encourage anyone that may be observing situations in which they do not feel safe to report that to the building principals so that they can address it immediately. We do expect all of our staff members, all of our students, and anyone within this community to follow the CDC recommendations and those that have come from the Department of Health. Okay. So if by some chance you join us late and you have specific questions for this evening, what I would encourage you to do is if you click on the link at the top of this video, there's a button that you can click for submitting questions. In the event that I'm unable to respond to your question during this session, I will attempt to respond Tuesday morning at 8:30. Okay. So the next section here are around student services, or ancillary services. And we'll start with food services and beverages. The questions were raised, are the children eating lunch in the cafeteria? In each of our buildings, we believe through the blended model and reduced number of students that all students will be able to eat their lunch in the cafeteria in a socially distanced manner. We have the table set up, and if you haven't had a chance, our middle school has put an example up of how they've rearranged the cafeteria for those lunches. Will kids be able to buy lunch in the cafeteria? Absolutely, students will be able to continue to get their lunch at the school in the blended model. They'll be eating their lunch in the cafeteria in each of our buildings. Students can have water bottles in school and avoid the drinking fountain use. A question we had from the earlier session that I didn't get to was, in the event a child is eligible for free and reduced lunch, we will be having pickup and delivery as we did during the closure last spring. That information will be coming out from our building principals to allow folks to know exactly where the pickup times are and what locations they'll be at. We had some questions about transportation. How will distance work on our buses? Students will be required to wear a mask on each of the school buses. They'll have designated seating that will be no less than 6 feet apart. Family members will be allowed to sit next to each other during the bus ride. When we load the bus, students will be asked to proceed down the aisle to the back of the bus. We'll load from the back towards the front, and then just reverse that process on the ride home. That will allow for a limited amount of potential exposure as students pass one another within the bus. For parents dropping kids off at high school, do we all just show up at 7:30? What is the plan? We'll be sending out information for each of the buildings. We're working right now with the transportation folks to determine how do we unload our buses in a timely fashion and provide social distancing. We want to try to avoid that herd mentality that looks like a barn with a bunch of cows coming into the barn through one central location. We're trying to spread that out as much as we possibly can. Okay. So that information will be coming in the next 2 weeks from the building principals. Some questions on school supplies. With all the changes that are happening and everything being the way they are, and teachers needing extra supplies, the question here is, can we set up accounts for Amazon? So if someone from the community wanted to make donations to certain classes to help with the supplies, can they do that? Absolutely. We'll be having the principals reach out to the community. If anyone's specifically interested, reach out to your building principal and you can help them with that part of it. Will there be time to bring school supplies and meet the teacher before school starts like normal years? Orientation for the 5th graders, for the 9th graders, for the kindergartners and others will be coming out very shortly, information for them to come through. There will be time available for parents to drop off materials for their students. It's important to note also that hand sanitizer is not allowed on the public school buses as they are explosive in nature. But that doesn't mean that parents can't send in hand sanitizer if they want to have a personalized bottle for their students in the classroom. We have installed multiple hand sanitizing stations throughout the district. I believe approximately 50 of them have been installed this summer, so that there'll be ample supplies for cleaning and for hand sanitizing. But we've also made adjustments in our bathrooms to make sure that we have warm water, that the water is going to flow for a sufficient amount of time for students to wash their hands. Why have supply lists been updated to reflect what they need for school, both from home and school, for the middle school, but not for the elementary school? Updated lists from the elementary school were sent once we made the determination because of the blended model. Expect that those similar supply lists will be coming to the elementary school in very short order. I apologize for the delay. And then we also had some questions specific to technology that I'd like to share. Is the district supplying appropriate calculators to distance learning students? Yes, that is our plan, to be able to provide calculators that would have been provided in the classrooms for them. Can cameras be set up so remote learners can view in-person classes and can be a part of the lesson being taught? This is something that we're exploring right now with our faculty to see if that's a possibility. Whether or not we can do that live or synchronously is in question. The other thing that we're looking at right now is to actually videotape the lessons and then putting them onto the different platforms that we'll be using, which include Google Classroom, Schoology, and Class Dojo. So teachers will be utilizing the technologies to the best of their abilities and have that information available to the students. We have a question. We have very limited Wi-Fi at my house. Has anything been done to make it easier for those of us in the same situation? It was almost impossible last year to keep up. We've identified many of the folks in the district that have either no or intermittent access to the internet. We have purchased a series of tools called Kajits. They're something that works off your cell phone and cell towers to provide internet services to the homes. Not a perfect solution, but it's better than not having it. We're also working very closely right now. I know that Niagara and Orleans County have put a multi-million-dollar, several $100 million grant forward to the Department of Agriculture to try and bring Wi-Fi to the region. We're also reaching out to some of the wireless carriers to see if we can redirect some of their cell coverage within the region. Hopefully that'll be a more quick turnaround to provide services. That larger grant from the federal government will not help us immediately to start the school year. I apologize for that. If you are struggling with intermittent or no cell service, please be certain that you identify that with our school principal so that we can act on it as soon as possible. Is there going to be Chromebook equipment pickup prior to the first day of school? We haven't established the dates yet, but that's absolutely our plan. We want to make sure that we have the devices, make sure we have the release forms signed, explain the sanitation requirements for those Chromebooks when they are brought back into the school. The students in a blended model, they'll be coming back and forth with the technology. If they're in a remote situation, that expect that students will be routinely maintaining those computers as well. Okay, I mentioned devices will be theirs. Will unreliable Schoology be dropped? Schoology will continue this year. It's one of the options that we're utilizing in the high school, in addition to Google Classroom and Class Dojo, as I mentioned at the elementary school. Okay. So let's move on to teaching and learning after a short water break. As you would imagine, we have lots and lots of questions about our instructional program. So first question, general questions regarding learning. When's the first day of school? We'll be inviting our first cohort, the Monday-Tuesday cohort, to join us on Tuesday, September 8th. And then our second cohort, which will be the L through Z cohort, will be joining us on Thursday, September 10th. There'll be staff development taking place on the 9th, and the 11th that week to make certain that our teachers are fully prepared for the return of our students. Why aren't these kids returning to school 5 days a week when other nearby districts are? Each school district is a little bit unique. They have different staffing levels. Their classrooms have different square footages. Some have vacant buildings and ways of moving staff around. Unfortunately, when we did the math, most of our classrooms at the elementary and middle school are about 500 square feet, which would allow a maximum number of students somewhere between 12 and 14, depending on how you count the furniture and the other adults in the room. That simply was not going to be able to work for us to have our students return on a full-time basis. And in the blended model, we needed to try to get underneath those thresholds. So currently, we can do our blended model and keep our class sizes down below 12 and be able to get things started. Will kids be returning 5 days a week in class instruction at all this year? If so, what is the timeline for the kids to return? I've had some districts say as little as 2 weeks before a transition to full days, other 10 weeks. At this moment in time, we don't know. We're not certain when we're going to be able to bring our students back full time. It is our goal as a school district. The number one concern will be the safety of our students and our staff. If we can maintain low transmission numbers and we can get our students socially distanced in our classrooms, we'll bring them back as soon as we possibly can. We've asked folks that are choosing the remote learning to make a commitment for the semester. That will help us to plan our class sizes and our master schedule to meet the needs of all of our students. We will continually review what the status is of all those numbers throughout the school year. Is the elementary on the same schedule as the middle and high school, or are they every day? The only students that will be attending 4 days a week will be our special education students that are in 12-1-1 classrooms. We also will allow our Boces students to attend 5 days a week with district transportation. They'll be doing their regular instruction 2 days a week, 3 days remotely, and then the Boces programs will be available 5 days a week, either in the morning or afternoon, depending on when their program falls. Will there be any change in school schedules in the weeks where students are missing a day due to holidays, such as Veterans Day, Indigenous People Day? At this time, we do not anticipate having any changes to the schedule. Next questions. Are we going to have the high school schedule in advance so that they know their teachers to check in with? And have elementary teachers been assigned? Due to the complexity of knowing the number of students that are in remote learning, determining which staff will be returning, we do not have those at this time. Our hope is within 2 weeks to be able to communicate with families and students who their teachers are and what their schedules will be. Apologize, and I ask that you please be patient with us. Will students keep their stuff in their backpack instead of using lockers? At the middle school, students will be asked to carry a backpack, as no lockers will be available for the start of the school year. In our high school, we have assigned lockers, but we'll be encouraging students to utilize their backpacks to keep their belongings and minimize the amount of time in the lockers. And we have no lockers at the elementary school. There was a question about overall, I'm very worried about my daughter. She has bad panic attacks and other issues. I want to know how it will be handled if she has one in the school. By having the lower numbers of students in the classroom, our teachers will have relationships with them very quickly. They'll be able to identify and work with them and know what their baseline is. Our school counselors, our resources will be available to assist any child that is struggling with the masks, with the change, with whatever anxieties they may be bringing from their time dealing with the COVID outside of school during the closure. Will there be any orientation for children entering high school or available times for them to tour the building? Those plans are coming together as we speak for new students at all grade levels, all buildings, and you should be hearing from your principals within the next week or two. Will we be able to use weekends to finish work? Many parents are working 5 days a week and coming home to support learning. We're working with our teachers right now to have a little bit of a mind shift in taking a look, instead of having daily lessons and daily assignments and daily work, to looking at over the long haul for a week. That these are our primary objectives. These are the accountabilities. These are the things that you as a child and as a student will be required to. We're trying to provide as much maximum flexibility for children to be able to do their work. Yes, in the blended model, they'll need to be in class and go through their typical schedule. In the remote learning model, whether it be from the blended or straight remote, there will be times that there'll be designated windows in which students need to report and be involved in the live, what we call synchronous learning with their teachers and with their peers. Most of the education will be done in an asynchronous time frame, in which there'll be deadlines and expectations, but the students may be able to drop down a video to watch that, to be reading a book and responding to questions, doing guided learning notes, and so forth. That information will be coming from the teachers to the families within the first week of school, so you'll have a very clear understanding of what the structures look like and what the expectations are. Will students be receiving AIS services? If so, how? In person, pull out or push in, or via Google Meet? It will be all of those depending on what situation the student's in. We do want to make sure that we have our specialists supporting our children throughout the course of the day, whether it's in person or remote. Are we still trying to meet all the curriculum requirements or prioritizing at this point? We've asked each of our teachers and our building principals and our curriculum leaders to focus on the core power standards. There are certain standards that are assessed and measured more robustly than others, and we want to make sure we get those taken care of. We will be making certain that we enhance the learning, make sure the students are engaged and enjoying the process as well. Are there still honors accelerated classes for the sophomores? To my understanding is that yes, that is true. What is the stress going to do to our teachers? How does it affect their health and well-being? How does it affect their ability to teach? Many, many other questions about our teachers. I think it's safe to say that every one of us that are part of the school have felt stress, as the families and the children and our entire community have felt during this period of pandemic. We need to take care of ourselves. We're putting systems in place to make sure that our staff and our students are getting the services and the supports that they need to deal with the current situation. We all have to work together. We are all responsible for keeping our schools open. I ask that each of you in this community to think about your actions, think about the people around you. We all need to make sure we're using our hand washing techniques, our hand sanitizing, our masks, and our social distancing. If we can keep that going in our community, we're going to be able to keep our schools open and then keep those services for our students and for our staff. Will there be multiple sources with photos of the school not following CDC guidelines, like the daisy chain and the yearbook pickup? Apparently there were scenes in which the distancing or perhaps masks weren't being worn. Again, I apologize for that if that took place with any of our staff members. We will be reinforcing that and reiterating the importance that all members of our school community must wear masks and keep their distancing and follow the protocols. I ask that if you see anyone that is not following those, please report that to your building principals so we can follow up and make sure that we correct any behaviors that are not in alignment with the district's philosophies. So we had several questions around remote learning. How long do we expect the 2 days a week of learning to last? First semester, the whole year? I wish I knew. I wish I had that answer for you. Our intention is to be able to create a situation where things are safe for students to come to school. We all would prefer to have our students in front of us than having to deal through a computer screen doing the remote learning. There's many, many good things, and many students flourished in the remote learning model during our school closure. Others need to have the social interaction and the supports that are in place. Not to mention our families, which are trying to manage work, home life, and school. Okay. Will children be able to do remote learning if sick or on quarantine? Absolutely. When students choose the blended model, the expectation is that they'll start the school year. We anticipate that students will become ill. And if they need to be quarantined for 14 days, they'll go into a remote situation and then come back to their classroom when they're ready and prepared to do that. What happens in January as kids come back? We'll reintroduce students back into the classroom in January if they choose to come back from the remote situation. And if January comes and families are not comfortable sending their students back, they'll continue with the remote learning throughout the rest of the school year. How will seniors be impacted by choosing long-distance learning? Schools are social places. Academics are critically important, only preceded by school safety. Safety, academics, and then all those growth and opportunities. During our school closure, our seniors probably had the greatest impact on them of all the classes. The college acceptance, and the spring sports, and the musical, and award ceremonies, and concerts, and senior concerts, and prom, and graduation. These are all things that were altered, and we had to find new ways of delivering that. My promise to you as community members and as parents for all our children is to try and maintain all of those celebrations, all those recognitions within what is practicable. Right now, sports are not being allowed to come back prior to the 21st of September. We're waiting for word to see whether or not we'll even be able to run our fall sports seasons as hoped. How will lab work tied to college classes be completed, credits, and grades given? Our counselors and high school principals have been working very closely with our colleges that have articulation agreements. They're working out the details, as it's not unique to Roy-Hart. It's happening throughout the county for our students that are attending college courses. Any parent that's concerned about the hours needed to take lab science examinations, it is 1,200 hours. We have flexibility to provide those in person or also in a remote learning environment. That has been something that the Board of Regents waived for us. For kids going virtual, will new learning be taking place on virtual days? Will everything be computer-based, or will some paper and pencil stuff come home? Our expectations will be delivered through our 3 platforms: Google Classroom, Schoology, and Class Dojo. Information could be downloaded and used and handwritten work done. There may be times in which teachers will be sending home packets of material or supplies for students to do other projects. Those will be worked out and communicated with you in the next couple of weeks. The distance learning model will include synchronous, which is real-time meetings and conversations, asynchronous delivery, in which students will be able to work at their leisure, work at specific times. There will be deadlines. There will be accountability. Every day our children will be expected to fill out a sheet which will let us know how they're doing. Are they academically? Do they understand the expectations? Do they have their week planned? And we'll be taking attendance. There should be daily contact by our teachers with every student every single day. Okay, there's a question about, is the district supplying lab materials for distance learning students to complete their labs at home? Yes, we'll be providing lab materials, we'll be providing software, we'll be providing the hardware, as we've talked about, with our specific computers for students to be able to utilize and make sure that they can stay on track as if they were in-person learning. We had several questions about the blended model. Is there a plan or timeline of when we will return to in-person learning? I think I've answered that question. As soon as we know that it's safe and that we can accommodate the students' needs, we will be looking to increase the number of days, ideally moving towards a full face-to-face learning opportunity. Right now, we just can't predict that. There's too many unknowns and too many variables out in the community. If we choose the hybrid plan and are unhappy, can we switch at any point and vice versa? If you start within the blended model that we're offering and determine that it's not working for you and your children, they absolutely can go to a full remote learning situation easily. In the event that a child's in a remote learning would like to move back to the hybrid or the blended model that we're offering, that may be a little bit more challenging, as we're going to be determining class sizes and assignments. I'd encourage families, if you're changing your mind or you're thinking about that, contact your principal, and if it's possible for us to accommodate students coming from remote into the blended, we'll consider that, but there are no guarantees. When you choose the remote learning, you're making a commitment for the first semester. Um, okay, I think I've answered those. There's a question here. New York State data and guidelines change frequently, and every school decision will be continually reassessed and reevaluated. Why aren't parents being given the same opportunity to reevaluate their situation and adjust in regard to having to commit to a full virtual learning option until January 25th? So, as I just mentioned, we know things will change, and we know that we need to make exceptions for situations that will be constantly fluid. With that said, we have certain capacities and limitations as we start to set up our master schedule in our classrooms. There may be a little bit of flexibility, and I'd encourage you again, if you have a specific situation, contact your building principal and let them know. And we'll do everything we can to try to support you. But once you've made that commitment, that is our planning process will proceed based on your choice at this time. If different days work out better for in-person learning, can we switch our child to those days? If they are scheduled for Monday and Tuesday, but Thursday and Friday work better with our schedule. We can accommodate a certain number of those changes. We will not be doing that because their friends are part of that other cohort if there's extenuating circumstances, or perhaps you have a blended family in which the last names don't align. We're going to make certain that we take those accommodations into consideration and align those so that families are not put out any more than we need to. We know this is difficult. We know it's a scheduling nightmare. Many of our staff have children that are in school age K-12 right now, and they're facing the same struggles that many of you are out in the audience today. Will kids be changing classrooms, or will it be the teachers? Our intention is to try to maintain our cohorts in grades pre-K through grade 6 and try to keep the students within their core areas. We'll be bringing the specials in the elementary school to the classrooms to make sure that those students do not have to be having lots of movement or interacting with other students. In our 5th and 6th grade, students will have their core academics, math, English, science, and social studies as a cohort staying together, but they will be traveling to their special teachers over the course of the day on a limited basis. Will students be required to participate in classes at certain times when they're learning remotely? And again, about the internet access. There may be specific times that the teacher wishes to meet, either with groups, the entire class, or individually, but those can be arranged with the teacher at the buildings. There were several questions about, can we ensure that all of the teachers actually teach the required material? It is the expectation that all of our professionals will be teaching to the New York State standards in alignment with their grade level teams and with the expectations of the school district. In the event you feel as if your child's not receiving the best education possible, I encourage you to reach out to the building principal and share your situation. There's likely an explanation for what's taking place, and if a correction needs to happen, then we'll be doing that in the school district. Okay. Again, some questions about seniors and the credits. The ability to manage the college coursework with only 2 days of face-to-face contact. Many of these students will be entering into the college environment very shortly, and most of the colleges have moved to virtual learning for all or part of their instruction. So we're going to make certain that we support our seniors that are transitioning, making sure that it's there. And when students are remote, we're going to be certain that we have several opportunities for them to be live conversations with their college teachers that are at the high school here. What will a typical day be like at home versus online learning for kids? That's going to vary by grade level and by building, and that information will be shared by our building leaders over the course of the next 2 weeks so that you'll know very clearly what the expectations are. As I had mentioned earlier here, we're going to be looking at the curriculum in week blocks as opposed to day blocks, with objectives to allow for maximum flexibility of our families and our children to achieve the expectations. Okay. Again, I think there's a lot of questions about the schedule, about distance learning, and how that's going to frame up. I don't have a specific, that information will be coming from your building principals. When will teachers' names be released at the elementary school, and when will we be notified how many kids will be in the classroom? I think, as I mentioned earlier here, the maximum number of students will be 12. It will probably range between 8 and 12 when all is said and done based on our class scheduling, but that has not yet been determined, and we'll be working to get that information out to the families as soon as practicable, probably within the next 2 weeks. Okay. Will teachers be required to use the parent portal? How often are they required to update the portal? And who will we report if a teacher is not using the parent portal? The parent portal is one of several tools that we will be using. The expectation is that teachers will keep that current. They'll also be maintaining their classes within, again, Class Dojo, Schoology, and or the Google Classroom. So if it's not, and you're not being communicated with effectively, your first line of defense is to reach out to the teacher via email. If you do not get a response back, I would try a phone call. If that doesn't work, then you go right to the building administration, and they will support you and try to help you to navigate whatever the challenges might be. Okay. A lot of questions about expectations of teachers. The teachers are beginning to understand what the expectations are. They're being trained in the use of the remote learning tools. The expectations, it should be much different than it was when we had to close our schools back in March with little to no time to prepare. I know that many teachers have been working very hard this summer to prepare for the opening of schools, anticipating that all or part of their instruction will be taking place remotely. Will we have a more structured grading system? And will teachers be holding Google Meets to teach the kids when they are at home? Yes, that is true. There'll be a structured grading system. We're working to make those consistent across the buildings and the grade levels. You'll be learning more about that in the near future. Okay. A lot of questions about when the remote learning is due. We want to provide as much flexibility as we can to meet the many challenges of you as families. I know that several families in the district have children at the elementary, middle, and high school, or some combination thereof. That can make things very difficult. We understand that. We're trying to work with you. Okay. There was questions about absenteeism. If a doctor's appointment happens, or if there's a scheduled thing and you miss a class or come in tardy, again, the districts are we're going to be very flexible to try to make certain that you can report late to school if necessary and try to work through the appointments that your children are in. If a child misses a class because of an appointment, a dentist or a doctor, whatever it might be, all the material that was available to the students will be made available to the children that are absent. There's no penalization because they're out for an appointment. Okay. Some questions about class sizes. Again, it'll depend on the classroom size and the building level. Right now, we're anticipating somewhere between 8 and 12 students will be the norm. In maybe some cases that it's a little bit larger or perhaps even smaller depending on the class sizes and the needs within the buildings. We're working very hard to keep our students as small as possible. With that said, if we keep classes small, it may limit us the number of days that students can have contact with the school. So we're measuring lots of different variables with that. If music, art, etc. are being taught in the homeroom, why can't we turn those spaces into additional classrooms and create smaller spaces allowing for 4 to 5 day instruction? We have explored the possibility of turning over our gymnasiums, our cafeterias, our music suites, and so forth to provide other instruction. That works in some cases, but then you need to have the staffing to be able to teach those additional sections, and that has been a bit of a challenge for us. The fiscal situation from Albany right now is very challenging. The state is running a deficit, and there are some concerns about state aid and the ability for the district to be able to support our programs. So right now it's difficult for us to bring on significant numbers of additional staffing, as well as the limitations to our buildings. Classroom settings. Will the students be able to interact and talk to teachers with whether at home and virtual learning? Absolutely. I think we've talked about that a little bit. Okay. Okay, so that's a little bit about instruction. We'll talk a little bit about special education. We had several questions on that. What will happen with IEPs if students stay at home for the first part and do distance learning? The districts will ensure that all of the IEP requirements are met. The students with disabilities will be receiving their services through their consultant teachers and through the other specialists. We'll make certain. If the IEP states that they're supposed to have 5 days of supports, the students will get 5 days of supports. There's been a lot of flexibility at the federal and state level up to this point for us to be able to provide those through teletherapy and through our teachers contacting. There should be daily contact from our special educators to each and every one of our special needs students. The students that require 12-1-1 classrooms, they will have 4 days of contact in person with their teacher, and then the 5th day will be remote. If I have concerns that my child has an IEP and how things such as OT are going to happen, what I would encourage you to do is reach out to your building principal, reach out to your special educator, and they'll make sure that your plan is being delivered and explain to you in great detail how we're going to make that happen. Will masks be required while students are in speech therapy? How will IEP plans be kept? Will therapists still be working with the children? We're currently exploring, as I mentioned earlier, specialized masks for speech. We're also looking at the possibility of using dividers in those situations. That information will be solidified in the next couple, 3 weeks. How are things going to be handled if a child with an IEP, will my son still be able to have his therapies? Absolutely, I think I've mentioned that before. How will districts work with children who have resource room daily written in their IEPs, but will only be in school 2 days a week? Will schools follow the IEP and accommodate the requirements with Google Meets to ensure that the students are receiving the additional supports they need to succeed? Absolutely. Whether their students are in person or in remote, they will be provided those services from our special educators. Okay. Next one will be around athletics, extracurricular, and extra help. Will classes be allowed time to use the playground? Is the playground use encouraged across all grade levels? Yes, the playgrounds will be open. They are beautiful. The elementary school is nearing the point at which it's going to be inspected. I would ask that all community members please stay off the playgrounds until September. We have to go through inspections and make sure that everything is safe. There's still a construction site down at the elementary school as we speak. Today we actually started the construction of the Middleport playground as well. It's unlikely that our middle school students will utilize the playground during the day, but we are encouraging all physical education and teachers to utilize the outdoors to do their instruction, which will allow for max breaks and also to allow students to have opportunities to be able to get out and get some fresh air and move around. If sports are able to start, but we still only 2 days a week, how will the athletes be able to get to practice when they don't drive and the parents work? As of right now, athletics will not begin anytime sooner than September 21st. We're currently looking at how we would transport students. We're working through situations for our Boces students as we speak to make sure that they can get to and from their programs. Okay. Accountability and tests. Questions were asked about accountability. So attendance will be taken each and every day through a check-in form that we've developed across the board. Assignments will be graded, much different than it was when we closed last year. Students will be expected to turn their work in. Now there may be written quizzes and tests. It might be writing assignments. It might be other lab activities. There will be a variety of expectations placed on our students to be able to get their work done and be held accountable for that. Okay. Let me see what else we got here. What will a typical day of school look like? The days in which students are involved in the blended model, it'll look very much the same as it did a year ago, except our students will be wearing masks. There'll be much fewer students in the buildings when they're in the session. The remote learning days will be dependent upon grade level and the expectations of the teachers. It'll combine both real-time or synchronous and, as I mentioned earlier, asynchronous, which is information that will be loaded, either teachers' presentations or assignments that students will have the flexibility to do on their time schedule. Okay. There's some questions about external supports and substitutes. We expect that some of our teachers may end up being quarantined. We last week appointed all of our substitutes teachers and aides for the school year. A letter will be going out to them with the expectations about the training that will be required. They'll also be going through building level orientations with their building principals to make sure they understand the expectations. Will there be training that will be provided? I think I just mentioned that. The intention is for us to make sure that all of our substitutes and external partners coming into the district have the same level of training or very similar to what we have for all of our other students. Looking here for a moment, I didn't mention anything about Boces. Gotta make sure that we've got that covered. So if you have a child that's attending the Boces centers, if they're a special education student, those Boces programs will be running 5 days a week in most cases. There will be opportunities for remote learning as well for our special ed Boces students. If you're a Boces CTE parent and want to learn more about the specifics, they're holding their public meetings today at 7 p.m. So if you want to jump off of this one, just go to the Boces website and you can log in to their meetings. They're also meeting tomorrow at 3 and 7 o'clock as well for the Medina Center. It's our intention right now to maintain whether a child at high school is enrolled remotely or in our blended model to be able to provide transportation to and from the CTE Center in Medina. If there are specific needs, parents can drop their children off at the CTE Center, and there will be a limited amount of parking for students that wish to drive. That'll be arranged both with our high school principal, Mr. Bell, and with the folks at the CTE Center. We will be providing transportation, and our preference will be, except in extenuating circumstances, for the students to drive, or not drive, but ride our school transportation. Okay. And again, reaching out to the Boces with your specific question, I think is very, very important. Art, music, and physical educations. Do the students still participate in band and gym? We're working through the guidelines right now on what is going to be practical. There are many questions here about the concern about the transmission of droplets while students are singing. Right now, the guidance documents are that we maintain 12-foot spacing in band, orchestra, chorus, and physical education, and students wear masks. We're trying to determine whether or not that's practical. I don't know how you wear a mask and play a woodwind. There may be situations where we have to do those lessons and classes in a remote session. So we're working on that, and we'll have much more detail within the next 2 weeks. Can parents opt out of music class or sing for their child? There are music requirements for graduation in the arts, but that does not mean necessarily that students have to be singing or playing instruments. There are alternatives for us to meet those requirements, and I ask again that you please reach out to your building principals to let them know what your concerns are. We know that singing is a high-risk activity, and we want to make sure that we limit the exposure to any of our students. Okay. And let's see if we've got any questions that came up that I haven't got to yet. Okay, we've got several here. Will all school buildings have MERV 13 filtration systems just as in malls? As I mentioned earlier here, we have maximized our systems. We've had them all tested, and we are exceeding what the Department of Health and the Department of Education expectations are for schools. With the infection rate so minimal in our area, why is my kindergartner and first grader education being compromised? 2 days a week is unreasonable and unacceptable. Again, I apologize about the inconvenience. Our hope is to be able to bring those students back for more contact hours if we can accommodate them within our classroom environments. We're going to start the school year off in our hybrid blended model and see where that goes. We would prefer to have all children in our buildings 5 days a week. Will the students still be able to participate in after-school activities and sports when they begin if they sign up for the distance learning option? Our hope and our expectation is to be able to open extracurricular activities, clubs that are remote in nature at the beginning of school, but unfortunately there will be no after-school activities until we can get clearance that we can maintain the low transmission rate. And yes, our students in distance learning will be able to participate in those activities. If this is going to happen anything like last year when teachers were just instructing and assigning, not teaching, the teaching portion is being left up to the parents. You can call it virtual learning, but we are still the teachers. What exactly will be the rules and timeline restrictions on assignments for asynchronous learning schedule? I would argue as a parent that I've always been my children's number one teacher. That is not to say that we're passing the buck on from what the school's responsibilities are to the families. Our teachers are much better prepared right now than they were back in March to provide a virtual distance learning situation. We hope that they'll be able to work with you as parents to try to help reinforce the educational program at home. We do expect fully that our teachers will be teaching, and we plan on holding them accountable to the expectations that you as a community have and I as superintendent of schools. If we had a schedule for students, we could make better decisions. I believe the deadline should be extended again until we have a student schedule. We will have your student schedules done as soon as practicable. I wish we had more information. I wish I could have those to you the 1st of August, but it's just not the case right now. We still have students and teacher situations, as I've explained earlier, to meet that need. Will you have air purifiers in the classrooms? At this time, there's no plans to have air purifiers in each of our classrooms, but we are making sure that the filtration systems are working as best as they can. Is there a plan for no school days and holidays? For example, Columbus Day, will students make up that day? At this time, we have not gone through the calendar to see how many days will be lost. When we did the initial look at it, the Mondays that are lost on some of the Columbus days are made up for the days like Thursdays and Fridays for Thanksgiving and so forth. So we think that the days are pretty much balanced. Will high school students be synchronous or asynchronous on remote learning days? The answer will be both. There'll be opportunities for the teachers and the class to get together collectively, but the majority of it will be done asynchronously. There are empty classrooms in the high school, a lot of unused space. We used to have 7th and 8th grade in the building. Is there the potential to do this again in order to increase days that kids can attend school, larger square footage rooms, etc.? It's something that we've explored and have had the conversation. There are positives and negatives to trying to bring 7th and 8th graders back to the high school. There are very specific developmental needs for middle school students, and we believe that the model we have right now, grades 5 through 8 at the middle school, is in the best situation. Is there square footage available? On a limited basis, yes, but we need to be able to continue to reflect on that and take a look. Will clubs be active, and what will the rules be for that? Certain clubs, like the high school newspaper, are already used to doing most things online. When clubs and activities can be done online and in a virtual environment, we're going to move forward with those. Unfortunately, we've not yet assigned all of our clubs and activities, not knowing what's going to take place in September. As I mentioned, there will be no after-school activities during the month of September. We're going to be asking our students to move along so that we can get into the building to make sure we sanitize for the next day. And the final question received was, my son completed his health assignments last year but received an incomplete. How is the grading going to be handled? I'd encourage you to have any specific questions, reach out to the building principal and the counselor staff, and they'll be certain to wrap things up for you. So that's the end of the questions that I've received during the stream. Once again, I want to thank the community for your patience with us here. As I mentioned, there's ever-changing variables that are going on. We do have the best interest of your children and this community in mind, and I look forward to continue working with you to make this the best year that we possibly can. Thank you and have a good evening.